After months of outrage, the Women's March officially denounced many of those comments, but its leaders are still seemingly unwilling to distance themselves from the Nation of Islam and Farrakhan himself. Now, other women's marches across America are being canceled, including one in Chicago. Joining us now is Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov and human rights attorney Brooke Goldstein. Thank you both for being here. Brooke, I want to start with you. The Women's March, has it been compromised?
It's been compromised from the beginning. You know, as Ben Stein said to me in the green room, if these women weren't leaders of the march, they'd be members of the KKK. Their neo-Nazi behavior, their anti-Semitism is so blatant and has been out front for so long, it's a wonder they haven't been condemned and shut out of the movement. It's beyond just their association with Farrakhan. Linda Sarsour, one of the founders of the Women's March, has called for the dehumanization of Jews. She has actually embraced PFLP terrorist Razmea Odeh, who murdered 2 young Israeli Jews and called to support her. She has tweeted in favor of the Islamic Jihad, a particular terrorist who is in jail for recruiting suicide bombers. And the irony is they are using the platform of the Women's March, which was set up to protect minority rights, to advocate for women's rights, to promote hatred against the world's oldest minority, the Jewish people. It is absolutely wrong, and it must come out in the open.
Now, Jessica's joining me here in New York. Jessica, it is the American way to petition your government, to march.
Absolutely.
I don't think anybody's opposed to that. But these aren't just rank and file members of, these are leaders of the Women's March.
Of the national movement.
The national movement.
And I think it's a wonderful thing to hear about states taking it upon themselves to organize their own local marches. I've written about Louis Farrakhan and the danger I think he poses to society and especially to the Democratic Party with the association of some prominent members with him. And I think that states should have a Women's March. I think it's incredibly important, and I admittedly did participate in the first Women's March here in New York right after Donald Trump's election, and I thought it was an important thing to be out there representing the rights of minorities, those who are not going to be represented by this administration and who continue to not be represented by them. But local leaders should organize and make sure that this message continues, but we don't need them. And they should be pushed out of the movement, and the others, like Bob Bland, for instance, who's been there since the beginning, if you're not going to turn on them and you're not going to stand for protection of all minorities, which is what the Women's March is about, shouldn't be there.
This is indicative, though, of a much larger problem that goes way beyond the Women's March. We have seen the use of the so-called progressive movement platform and the liberal space now being invaded by anti-Semitism. Look at the embracing, not just of Farrakhan, but Keith Ellison, and it's now, you know, steeping into our schools. We have a major school, San Francisco State University, for example, that happens to be being sued by my organization, the Lawfare Project, for rampant civil rights violations against Jews. And the excuse is, well, we're progressive, we're anti-Zionist. And how does that turn out? They turn around and target Jewish students by excluding them from a Know Your Rights fair, which was meant to educate about minority rights. We are seeing the progressive space, again, being infiltrated by this type of hatred. It must stop.
I know, Brooke, that you do spend all day steeped in this, and this is not my main area of focus, but I would push back there as someone who is a proud member of the Democratic Party, liberal, more moderate Democrat necessarily than a Bernie Sanders type progressive, but I don't believe that we are an anti-Semitic entity. I do not believe that we're advocating for policies.
I did not say that. But
no,
why
but you're saying this is a problem in the progressive movement, and I'm pushing back there. When you have what happened, for instance, in Charlottesville, where you had people marching and saying Jews will not replace us, and then a president equivocating on it and saying there are many fine people on both sides there, that to me is a real problem. I'm happy to talk about Farrakhan.
I'm very heartened to see members of the left finally come out. What has taken so long? Linda Sarsour has been using her platform. I was at the Brooklyn March that she did about a year ago, where she dovetailed from talking about women's rights into blatant anti-Semitism. Not only that, when has the women's rights movement ever come out against the massive slavery and abuse of women in Muslim-majority countries? Why didn't the women's movement come out when Linda Sarsour was attacking Ayaan Hirsi Ali? This is a problem that has existed for a long time, and again, goes beyond just the Women's March. I'm happy that we are talking about it. I'm happy that my colleagues on the left and the right are coming together and agreeing that anti-Semitism has no place in the progressive space.
Brooke, I so appreciate that you are so involved and engaged in this, but I want to give the last word to Jessica. It's been a great discussion. Jessica.
Yeah, I would reiterate what I said before, that the progressives, the liberals, the Democrats, we are not an anti-Semitic party. I think what Louis Farrakhan preaches, which goes beyond anti-Semitism to sexism and bigotry against LGBTQ people, has no place in, frankly, any modern-day party, and he should absolutely be pushed out there. So I would just, again, encourage local organizers, make sure that we do have a women's march so that women and men and our allies and the kids are so cute out there, can come together and speak up against this administration.
But if you have this women's march with those leaders in place who are in support of Farrakhan, there's a reason why Rhode Island and Washington State and Chicago are abandoning and fleeing here.
Should be paying attention to this issue. There's a wonderful, very, very long piece in Tablet that goes very in depth into this issue, which I would encourage everyone when they have an hour to read, to pay attention to the issue. But
well, we don't have an hour, so I have got to cut it off there. And thank you both for joining us, and Happy New Year to you both, and thank you so much for being here. An unbelievable